It was just an ordinary afternoon on the city bus, the kind of day where nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The sun blazed down, baking the streets in its relentless heat, and passengers shuffled aboard, heads down, earbuds in, hoping to get through their commute without interruption. Among the riders sat a young white teenager named Liam. He was just like any other kid his age, quiet, blending into the background, and focused on getting home after a long day at school. But today, something was about to change that would throw his quiet routine life into complete chaos. A few stops into the ride, the mood on the bus shifted. A group of men, loud and brash, climbed aboard. Their voices filled the small space, their presence impossible to ignore. At first, Liam tried to block them out, staring at his phone, pretending not to hear the insults they were hurling across the aisle. That's when he saw her, a black woman sitting by herself, head held high, eyes fixed on the window as though she could escape through it. The men had locked onto her, and their mocking voices grew louder, their words nastier. Liam's heart began to race. He didn't know this woman, had never seen her before, but the injustice unfolding in front of him was unbearable. He looked around, hoping anyone would stand up for her, but the other passengers either pretended not to notice or were too scared to get involved. The tension in the bus grew thicker, suffocating. The woman's silence was dignified, but the relentless verbal attacks chipped away at the small comfort of her solitude. Then, something snapped inside Liam. Without thinking, he stood up. His legs felt like jelly, his voice wavered at first, but he couldn't sit there any longer. "Leave her alone," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The bus went silent, the men turning their attention to him, surprised by the interruption. Liam wasn't sure what scared him more, the angry glares of the men, or the fact that no one else seemed willing to back him up. The leader of the group stepped forward, towering over Liam with a sneer plastered across his face. "What's it to you?" he asked, voice dripping with menace. Every part of Liam's body screamed at him to sit down, to apologize, to back away. But he couldn't. Something deeper than fear held him in place. "It's wrong. She doesn't deserve this," Liam responded, voice growing steadier with each word. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. The entire bus waited to see what would happen next. The men stared Liam down, their expressions dark and unreadable. Would they lash out? Would they turn their fury on him now? Liam braced for impact, his heart pounding in his ears, sweat forming on the back of his neck. The woman looked up for the first time, her eyes meeting his, a mixture of surprise and gratitude flashing across her face. But just as quickly as the confrontation had begun, it ended. The men, perhaps caught off guard by Liam's boldness, backed down. With a few muttered insults, they stepped away and moved to the back of the bus. Liam let out a breath he didn't know he was holding, his hands trembling as he sat back down. The woman mouthed a quiet thank you to him before returning her gaze to the window, the tension slowly dissipating. When Liam got off the bus, the whole incident felt surreal, as if it had happened to someone else. He didn't tell anyone about it, figuring it was just one of those random, fleeting moments of courage that wouldn't matter in the grand scheme of things. But he was wrong, because the next day, something entirely unexpected happened. As Liam walked into school, the usual morning chatter of students and teachers filled the air. He was about to head to his first class when he noticed a sleek black Mercedes pull up to the front of the school. It was an unusual sight. Cars like that didn't typically show up in front of his public high school. He tried to brush it off, assuming it was just a coincidence. But then he saw it. A man, dressed in a sharp suit, stepping out of the vehicle, scanning the crowd. His eyes landed on Liam, and in that moment, Liam's heart sank. Why was he being watched? Was this connected to the bus incident? And who was the man in the Mercedes? Liam's heart raced as the man in the suit stared at him, his expression unreadable. For a brief second, their eyes locked, and Liam felt a chill crawl down his spine. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a coincidence. He had never seen the man before, yet the way the stranger's gaze was fixed on him felt personal, like he had come here with a purpose. Instinctively, Liam lowered his head, hoping to blend in with the crowd of students milling around the entrance. But it was no use. He could feel the weight of the man's eyes on him, as if he was being singled out in a sea of faces. Liam quickly slipped through the school's main doors, his mind racing. Who was this guy? Why would someone in a fancy car show up at his school? And more importantly, why did it feel like it had something to do with what happened on the bus yesterday? He hadn't told anyone about standing up for the woman, hadn't thought much of it beyond feeling proud that he did the right thing. But now, he couldn't shake the sense that his life was about to be turned upside down. As he hurried down the hallway, he couldn't help but glance back at the large windows that lined the front of the building. The Mercedes was still parked outside, gleaming in the morning sun. The man hadn't moved, he was still standing there, watching. Liam's palms grew sweaty, and his mind raced with possibilities. Was he in danger? Could the men from the bus have sent this guy after him? That didn't seem likely. They hadn't looked organized or capable of something like this. Still, the timing of everything made his stomach churn with unease. Class was a blur. He couldn't focus on the lessons, his mind looping back to the man in the Mercedes. Every noise from the hallway, every passing face, made Liam flinch. His friends noticed something was off, but when they asked if he was okay, he just brushed it off with a shaky smile, telling them he was fine. But inside, his anxiety was growing, gnawing at him. He kept replaying the events of the previous day, trying to figure out what might have triggered this strange turn of events. At lunch, Liam sat alone, unable to shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in the pit of his stomach. His eyes kept darting to the windows, half expecting to see the black Mercedes still sitting outside, the man waiting for him to emerge. But the car was gone, leaving him with more questions than answers. He tried to reassure himself that maybe it was all in his head, maybe the guy wasn't watching him at all. But something deep inside told him otherwise. After school, Liam considered taking the long way home, hoping to avoid running into any more surprises. But as he rounded the corner near the front gate, his worst fear came true. The Mercedes was back. It sat parked at the curb, engine idling, as if it had been waiting there all day. The man in the suit stood beside the car, watching Liam approach with a calm, almost calculated expression. Liam's heart pounded in his chest, and every instinct told him to turn around and run. But he knew that wouldn't solve anything. His feet felt like lead as he forced himself to keep walking. The man's eyes never left him, tracking his every move as he came closer. Finally, Liam stopped a few feet away, his throat dry, his palms slick with sweat. "Liam, isn't it?" the man asked, his voice smooth, but there was an undercurrent of something else, something that made Liam's skin crawl. How did this guy know his name? Liam nodded slowly, too shocked to speak. The man smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I've been looking for you," he said, the words hanging in the air like a threat. "Get in the car. There's someone who wants to meet you." Liam's mind spun. He couldn't get in that car, he knew that much. Everything about this screamed danger, but his body was frozen in place. "Who are you?" Liam managed to croak out, his voice barely more than a whisper. The man tilted his head slightly, studying him as if he were weighing how much to reveal. "Let's just say I work for someone who appreciates what you did yesterday," he replied, his tone cryptic. "And they'd like to thank you personally." Liam's pulse quickened. He didn't know what this man was talking about, but every fiber of his being screamed that he needed to get out of there now. "I'm not going anywhere with you," Liam said, his voice shaky but firm. The man's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes darkened. "That's not a request," he said coldly. He took a step forward, and Liam's breath caught in his throat. Panic surged through him, and without thinking, he turned and bolted down the street, his backpack slamming against his back as he sprinted away from the Mercedes. He didn't look back. He couldn't. His feet pounded the pavement, his heart thundering in his chest as he raced through the familiar streets, weaving between pedestrians and darting through alleys in a desperate attempt to lose the man. He didn't stop running until he reached his neighborhood, his legs burning, lungs aching. Only then did he risk a glance over his shoulder, half expecting to see the Mercedes creeping up behind him. But the street was empty. Liam slowed to a walk, his mind racing. Who was that guy? And why had he been so insistent on getting Liam into the car? His heart still pounded in his ears, the adrenaline coursing through him, making it hard to think clearly. All he knew was that something bigger was at play here, something dangerous. And it had all started with what he thought was a small act of courage on that bus. For the next few days, Liam kept a low profile, constantly glancing over his shoulder, paranoid that the man in the Mercedes might show up again. But there was no sign of him. It was as if the encounter had never happened, leaving Liam in a strange limo of uncertainty. The tension gnawed at him, and his sleep was restless, filled with nightmares of being chased, of faceless men in suits surrounding him. Then one morning, as Liam sat at the breakfast table, his mother's voice cut through his thoughts. "You've got a letter, Liam. It's from someone named the Foundation. Do you know what that is?" Her tone was casual, but the name sent a jolt of recognition through him. He shook his head slowly, unsure of what to make of it. Liam reached for the envelope, his fingers trembling as he tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "You've caught our attention. We would like to extend an invitation to meet. Consider this an opportunity, one that could change your life. You stood up when others remained silent. We value that. The Foundation." Liam's pulse quickened as he read the letter, the words sinking in like lead. He had no idea who the Foundation was, but everything in his gut told him that this was connected to the man in the Mercedes, and that whatever they wanted from him, it wasn't good. As he stared down at the cryptic letter, the weight of the mystery deepened, the unanswered questions swirling in his mind. What did they want with him, and how far were they willing to go to get it? The tension gnawed at him, and the feeling of being watched crept back in. Every day since the encounter, Liam had felt like something was lurking just beyond his view, waiting for him to make a move. Now, with this letter in his hand, that feeling was more suffocating than ever. Something big was happening, and he was at the center of it. But he still didn't know why. Liam stared at the letter in disbelief, his mind racing as the cryptic words seemed to echo in his head. The Foundation. He had never heard of them, but something about the way they phrased the message, the eerie vagueness of it, made his skin crawl. What had he gotten himself into? Who were these people? And why were they so interested in him? He glanced at his mom, who was already busy tidying up the kitchen, oblivious to the turmoil brewing inside him. Should he tell her? But what would he even say? He didn't know how to explain any of this, without sounding paranoid or crazy. Instead, he shoved the letter into his backpack, deciding to keep it to himself for now. Maybe this was nothing, just some weird coincidence. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Liam tried to focus on his classes, but his thoughts kept circling back to the letter. Every creak of the school doors, every passing car outside the window made him flinch. He felt like the walls were closing in, and the feeling that someone was watching him never left. After school, Liam walked home cautiously, half expecting to see the black Mercedes waiting for him again. But the street was empty. He made it home without incident, but the unease gnawed at him. He decided to go up to his room and reread the letter, hoping to find some clue he'd missed the first time. But just as he was about to pull it out, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We see you, Liam. Time to make a choice." His breath caught in his throat. He dropped the phone onto his bed, staring at the screen in horror. How did they get my number? He hadn't told anyone about the letter or the man in the Mercedes. This was no coincidence. Whoever the Foundation was, they were watching him closer than he realized. Liam's mind raced. He felt trapped. He knew he couldn't just ignore this, but what were his options? He couldn't go to the police. What would he tell them? That some mysterious group was sending him vague letters and texts. He could already picture the look on their faces. No, he was on his own, and that terrified him. Later that night, Liam lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the letter and the text pressing down on him. His mind swirled with questions, but no answers came. The darkness in his room felt oppressive, as if the shadows themselves were closing in. Just as he was starting to drift into a restless sleep, he heard a noise outside his window. A soft tap, then another. Liam's heart raced as he sat up, every nerve in his body on high alert. Slowly, he crept to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to peek outside. At first, he saw nothing, but then, under the faint glow of the streetlight, he noticed a figure standing across the street. It was the man in the suit. He stood motionless, his face obscured by the shadows, but Liam knew it was him. The same man who had been waiting by the Mercedes. The same man who had tried to get him into the car. And now he was here, right outside his house. Liam's heart pounded in his chest. He knew he couldn't trust her, but something about her calm, collected demeanor made it hard to resist. His mind raced, trying to figure out his next move. But before he could respond, she leaned in slightly, her expression darkening. "You can come willingly, Liam," she said quietly, but her words carried a threat. "Or we can do this the hard way. Either way, you're coming with me." And with that, the tension snapped, the conflict laid bare. Liam had no choice. He was caught in a web he didn't fully understand, and there was no easy way out. Liam's mind raced as he stood frozen, eyes locked on the woman in the Mercedes. His pulse thudded in his ears, drowning out every rational thought that tried to push its way to the surface. He didn't trust her. How could he? She represented the Foundation, the same shadowy group that had been stalking him, sending cryptic letters and messages, watching him from afar. But the real terror came from the knowledge that he didn't have much of a choice. She made that perfectly clear. I need to think," he stammered, stepping back from the car, his legs shaky beneath him. The woman's smile faltered, replaced by an expression that chilled him to the bone. Her hand hovered over the door, fingers lightly tapping, as if deciding what to do next. "You don't have time to think, Liam," she said calmly. "We don't have time to waste." Liam's breath hitched, the words making his stomach churn. He could feel the weight of her gaze, a cold, calculating stare that told him she was far more dangerous than she appeared. He had to get away, but how? His house was only a few feet away, but could he even make it to the door before she stopped him? He wasn't sure. "Please," he blurted out, desperate for something, anything that might buy him more time. "Just tell me why. Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't respond right away. Instead, she glanced around the empty street, her attention shifting for just a moment. It was enough for Liam to take a step back, his heart racing, ready to bolt. "You're brave, Liam," she said after a moment, her voice strangely soft now. "That's why the Foundation is interested in you. Courage is rare, especially when it's not about saving yourself but helping others." Like the woman on the bus, Liam's throat tightened at the mention of the incident. It seemed like such a small act at the time, standing up for someone, doing what felt right. But now it had spiraled into something he couldn't control, something far beyond anything he'd imagined. He took another step back, his hand inching toward his phone, hoping maybe he could call for help. But woman's voice cut through his thoughts again, sharp and commanding. "Don't think about running, Liam. We've been patient, but that can change." The words sent a jolt of fear through him. She wasn't bluffing. He could feel it in her tone, the subtle threat underlying every syllable. This wasn't just a choice anymore, it was a matter of survival. And whatever the Foundation was, they weren't going to let him walk away easily. Before Liam could make another move, the sound of an engine revving down the street drew both their attention. Another car was approaching, a sleek black SUV gliding down the road like a predator stalking its prey. The woman glanced at it, her expression unreadable, but Liam saw the slight tension in her body. "This isn't over," she said abruptly, her gaze flicking back to Liam. "But for now, you're safe. We'll be in touch." Without another word, she rolled up the window and sped off, the Mercedes disappearing around the corner just as the SUV pulled to a stop in front of Liam's house. Liam's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the two men step out of the vehicle, both dressed in black suits, their expressions stern and unreadable. He had no idea who they were, but something about them seemed different from the woman, less polished, more threatening. One of the men approached him, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he didn't want to startle Liam. "Are you Liam?" he asked, his voice deep and measured. Liam nodded, his throat too tight to speak. "We're here to help," the man continued, glancing over at the spot where the Mercedes had been moments before. "You're in danger, but if you come with us, we can protect you from the Foundation." Liam's head spun with confusion. Who were these men? Why did they know about the Foundation? And how could he trust them any more than he could trust the woman who had just left? Every instinct told him to run, but where would he go? He was trapped between two forces he didn't understand, both pulling him in opposite directions. The second man spoke up, his voice quieter, but no less serious. "You're not alone in this. The Foundation has been after people like you for a long time, but there are others people who fought back. We're part of that resistance." Resistance? The word echoed in Liam's mind, conjuring images of underground movements and secret battles fought in the shadows. This was starting to sound less like real life and more like a conspiracy theory. But the fear gnawing at his insides told him that whatever this was, it was deadly serious. "What do you mean, people like me?" Liam finally found his voice, though it was shaky. The first man exchanged a glance with his partner before answering. "People with potential. The Foundation targets individuals who show exceptional courage, intelligence, or leadership traits they can manipulate for their own agenda. But those same traits make you dangerous to them if you're not under their control." Liam's mind reeled. "So, what? They want me to work for them?" "Something like that," the man replied grimly. "But once they have you, there's no going back. That's why we're offering you a choice." Liam could barely process what he was hearing. A choice. But what kind of choice was this? On one side, a shadowy organization that had been stalking him, threatening him. On the other, these men claiming to be part of some resistance against the Foundation. Neither option felt safe, but could he afford to do nothing? The second man stepped forward, his voice softer, almost sympathetic. "I know this is overwhelming, Liam, but you don't have to decide right now. Just know that we're here. When you're ready to fight back, we'll be waiting." With that, the two men turned and walked back to the SUV, leaving Liam standing there, his head spinning with questions. He watched them drive away, their words still hanging in the air. They'd said he didn't have to decide now, but how long could he wait before the Foundation came for him again? And if he did decide to fight back, what would that even look like? That night, Liam barely slept. Every sound outside his window made him jump. Every shadow seemed to move. His mind churned with thoughts of the Foundation, the woman in the Mercedes, and the two men who had appeared out of nowhere. Nothing made sense anymore. He was just a high school kid, a nobody. How could his life have gotten so complicated, so dangerous, in just a matter of days? By the next morning, Liam knew he couldn't keep this to himself any longer. He had to tell someone. But who? His friends wouldn't understand, and he couldn't risk getting them involved. His mom would only worry, and the last thing he wanted was for her to become a target too. As he walked to school, his thoughts kept drifting back to Mr. Davidson. He was the only person who seemed to know anything about the Foundation, and maybe, just maybe, he could help Liam figure out what to do next. But as Liam reached the school, he noticed something strange. Mr. Davidson's car wasn't in its usual spot in the parking lot. Liam's stomach sank. He hurried inside, weaving through the hallways toward Mr. Davidson's classroom. But when he got there, the door was locked. A piece of paper was taped to it, written in the principal's handwriting. "Mr. Davidson will be out for the rest of the week. Substitute teacher assignments to follow." Liam stared at the note, dread pooling in his gut. Mr. Davidson had seemed fine just yesterday. What could have happened? Was this connected to the Foundation? Had they gotten to him already? The questions swirled in his mind, each one more unsettling than the last. The day dragged on, each class blurring together as Liam tried to keep his mind from spiraling. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was happening, something he had no control over. By the time the final bell rang, he was ready to go home and hide, just to get away from the mounting pressure. But as Liam walked out of the school, he noticed a familiar figure leaning against a lamppost at the edge of the parking lot. It was one of the men from the SUV, the quieter one. His face was unreadable as he watched Liam approach, but there was an urgency in his posture that made Liam's pulse quicken. "We need to talk," the man said quietly as Liam neared him. "Things are moving faster than we expected. You're in more danger than you realize." Liam felt his heart skip a beat. "What do you mean? What's happening?" The man glanced around, making sure they were alone before he spoke again. "The Foundation knows you're hesitating. They don't like waiting, and they've already made their next move." Liam's blood ran cold. "What move?" The man's expression darkened. "Mr. Davidson. They've taken him." Liam felt like the ground had just been ripped out from under him. His worst fears were confirmed. The foundation had gotten to Mr. Davidson, and it was because of him. This was his fault. Liam's heart sank as the man's words hit him like a freight train. Mr. Davidson had been taken. The mentor he had turned to, the one person who seemed to have a clue about what was going on, was now in the clutches of the foundation. Panic surged through him, his thoughts spiraling out of control. It wasn't just about him anymore. Now someone else was suffering because of his involvement. Guilt gnawed at him, and the weight of the situation pressed down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. Liam stared at the man in disbelief, his voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean? They've taken him. What are they going to do to him?" The man's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes: regret. Maybe? Or fear? They're going to use him to get to you. The foundation doesn't make idle threats, Liam. When they see someone as valuable as you, they'll do whatever it takes to pull you into their grasp. Mr. Davidson is leverage now. The words hit Liam like a punch to the gut. His mind whirled with images of Mr. Davidson being held somewhere against his will, all because of him. But how had the foundation known he was even talking to Mr. Davidson in the first place? They had eyes everywhere. It was like they could see into his life, no matter where he went, no matter how careful he tried to be. He couldn't help but glance over his shoulder, feeling exposed, like at any moment someone from the foundation could be watching. But why Mr. Davidson? Liam asked, his voice shaking. Why would they take him, and not just come for me? The man sighed, his gaze drifting to the horizon, as if considering how much to reveal. Mr. Davidson isn't just your teacher. He's been involved in trying to take down the foundation for years. He's one of the few people who knows enough about them to be a threat. He probably knew this was coming. He's been protecting you, Liam, but now he needs your help. Liam's heart pounded in his chest. He'd never imagined his life would turn into something out of a spy thriller, where secret organizations kidnapped people and used them as pawns. And now it seemed like there was more to Mr. Davidson than he'd ever known. He wasn't just a teacher. He was involved in something bigger, something dangerous. The thought made Liam's head spin. So what am I supposed to do? Liam asked, his voice tight with desperation. How am I supposed to help him when I don't even understand what's going on? The man gave him a hard look, his expression serious. That's why we're here. The resistance, we've been fighting the foundation from the inside for years. And we've been watching you, waiting for the right moment. You have a choice, Liam. You can keep running, hiding, and letting them control your life, or you can join us. If you fight back, you might be able to save Mr. Davidson and others like him. Liam felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Could he really join this so-called resistance and take on an organization as powerful as the Foundation? His gut reaction was to run as far away as possible. But how could he live with himself knowing that people like Mr. Davidson were suffering because of him? Before he could respond, the man's phone buzzed. He glanced down at it, his face tightening. "We don't have much time," he said, pocketing the phone. "The Foundation is moving faster than we expected. They're closing in." Liam's pulse quickened. "Closing in on me?" The man gave a curt nod. "They're always watching, Liam. You don't have the luxury of sitting on the sidelines anymore. Whatever you decide, you need to do it now." Liam's mind raced as he weighed his options. Could he really trust these men? They seemed like his only chance at figuring out what was happening, but that didn't make them safe. And yet, what other choice did he have? The Foundation was clearly willing to go to extreme lengths to get to him, and now that Mr. Davidson was involved, the stakes were higher than ever. Before Liam could speak, something unexpected happened. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a message. He quickly pulled it out, expecting it to be from his mom, or maybe one of his friends. But when he opened the message, his blood ran cold. It was from a number he didn't recognize, but the message was clear and chilling. "You're not safe. We know where you are." Liam stared at the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked up at the man, his voice barely above a whisper. "They know. They know I'm here." The man's face darkened, and he grabbed Liam's arm, pulling him toward the SUV. "We need to move. Now." Before Liam could protest, the man opened the door and shoved him inside, jumping in after him. The SUV roared to life, and they sped away from the school, the tires screeching on the pavement. Liam's heart pounded in his chest as he glanced out the window, expecting to see another car following them at any moment. "Where are we going?" Liam asked, his voice trembling. The man glanced at him from the driver's seat. "Somewhere safe, for now. But they won't stop until they have you. We need to get you off their radar." Liam's mind raced as he tried to process everything that was happening. Just days ago, his biggest concern was passing his next history exam. Now, he was on the run from a shadowy organization that was willing to kidnap people to get to him. And he still didn't know why. As they sped through the streets, Liam's phone buzzed again. Another message. He hesitated for a moment before opening it. "You can't run from us, Liam. We will find you." His stomach churned. The messages were getting more direct, more threatening. Whoever was behind them wasn't just watching, they were closing in. Liam looked at the man in the passenger seat, his voice tight with fear. "How do they keep finding me? I thought you said I was safe." The man's jaw clenched. "The Foundation has resources beyond what you can imagine. They have eyes and ears everywhere. But don't worry, we have our own ways of staying hidden." Liam wasn't convinced. Every time he thought he was safe, the Foundation seemed to be one step ahead. How long could he keep running before they caught up to him? And what would happen if they did? As the SUV weaved through the city streets, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. He glanced out the window again, his mind racing with thoughts of Mr. Davidson. Where was he? Was he okay? The guilt gnawed at Liam's insides, making it hard to think straight. But then, just as they turned down a quiet, narrow street, something unexpected happened. A black sedan appeared out of nowhere, cutting them off. The driver slammed on the brakes, and the SUV skidded to a stop just inches from the sedan's bumper. Liam's heart raced as he stared at the car in front of them. Two men stepped out, both dressed in black suits. Their faces were expressionless, but their eyes were cold, calculating. Liam recognized them immediately. They were from the Foundation. Panic surged through him as the men approached the SUV. The driver of the SUV cursed under his breath, reaching for something under his seat. "Stay down, Liam," he ordered, his voice tense. Liam ducked down as instructed, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the sound of the men's footsteps as they approached the vehicle, slow and deliberate. Every nerve in his body was on edge, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The next few moments passed in a blur. There was shouting, sound of metal scraping against metal, and then a loud crash as something hit side of SUV. Liam's body jolted as the car rocked on its wheels, impact sending shockwaves through him. He had no idea what was happening outside, but the fear coursing through his veins was enough to paralyze him. He squeezed his eyes shut, hoping it would all be over soon, one way or another. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. Liam's ears rang in the sudden silence, his breathing ragged. He stayed still, waiting, terrified that any movement might draw attention to him. After what felt like an eternity, the door to the SUV swung open. Liam flinched, expecting to see one of the Foundation's men standing there, ready to drag him out. But instead, it was the man from the Resistance, the one who had been driving. He was bleeding from a gash on his forehead, but he was alive. "We have to go," the man said urgently, reaching in to pull Liam out. "Now?" Liam didn't argue. He scrambled out of the SUV, his legs shaky beneath him. He barely had time to register the wrecked sedan and the two unconscious men lying on the ground before the Resistance man grabbed his arm and started running. They sprinted down the narrow alleyway, their footsteps echoing off the brick walls. Liam's lungs burned as he struggled to keep up, his mind racing with 1,000 questions. But there was no time for answers. Now they had to keep moving, or they wouldn't make it out. As they turned the corner, Liam risked a glance back. The two men from the Foundation were stirring, slowly getting to their feet. They wouldn't stay down for long. The stakes had never been higher. As Liam and the Resistance man ran through the dark alleyways, the weight of the situation pressed harder on his chest. The faint sound of footsteps echoed behind them, getting closer. He could feel the hot breath of danger on his neck, knowing that the Foundation's men weren't far behind. Every shadow seemed to harbor another threat, and every turn of a corner felt like it might lead to a trap. The Resistance man, who had introduced himself only as Mark, was clearly injured. He winced with every step, blood trickling down his face from the wound on his forehead, but he didn't slow down. Liam marveled at his resilience, even as fear gnawed at the edges of his own sanity. The world he had known, school, friends, and a future full of possibility, had been ripped away, replaced by a life on the run, chased by forces he couldn't fully comprehend. "Where are we going?" Liam gasped, trying to keep pace. His lungs burned with exertion, and the adrenaline that had fueled his escape was starting to fade. Just days ago, his biggest concern was passing his next history exam. Now, he was on the run from a shadowy organization that was willing to kidnap people to get to him. And he still didn't know why. As they sped through the streets, Liam's phone buzzed again. Another message. He hesitated for a moment before opening it. "You can't run from us, Liam. We will find you." His stomach churned. The messages were getting more direct, more threatening. Whoever was behind them wasn't just watching, they were closing in. Liam looked at the man in the passenger seat, his voice tight with fear. "How do they keep finding me? I thought you said I was safe." The man's jaw clenched. "The Foundation has resources beyond what you can imagine. They have eyes and ears everywhere. But don't worry, we have our own ways of staying hidden." Liam wasn't convinced. Every time he thought he was safe, the Foundation seemed to be one step ahead. How long could he keep running before they caught up to him? And what would happen if they did? As the SUV weaved through the city streets, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. He glanced out the window again, his mind racing with thoughts of Mr. Davidson. Where was he? Was he okay? The guilt gnawed at Liam's insides, making it hard to think straight. But then, just as they turned down a quiet, narrow street, something unexpected happened. A black sedan appeared out of nowhere, cutting them off. The driver slammed on the brakes, and the SUV skidded to a stop just inches from the sedan's bumper. Liam's heart raced as he stared at the car in front of them. Two men stepped out, both dressed in black suits. Their faces were expressionless, but their eyes were cold, calculating. Liam recognized them immediately. They were from the Foundation. Panic surged through him as the men approached the SUV. The driver of the SUV cursed under his breath, reaching for something under his seat. "Stay down, Liam," he ordered, his voice tense. Liam ducked down as instructed, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the sound of the men's footsteps as they approached the vehicle, slow and deliberate. Every nerve in his body was on edge, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The next few moments passed in a blur. There was shouting, sound of metal scraping against metal, and then a loud crash as something hit side of the SUV. Liam's body jolted as the car rocked on its wheels, impact sending shockwaves through him. He had no idea what was happening outside, but the fear coursing through his veins was enough to paralyze him. He squeezed his eyes shut, hoping it would all be over soon, one way or another. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. Liam's ears rang in the sudden silence, his breathing ragged. He stayed still, waiting, terrified that any movement might draw attention to him. After what felt like an eternity, the door to the SUV swung open. Liam flinched, expecting to see one of the Foundation's men standing there, ready to drag him out. But instead, it was the man from the Resistance, the one who had been driving. He was bleeding from a gash on his forehead, but he was alive. "We have to go," the man said urgently, reaching in to pull Liam out. "Now?" Liam didn't argue. He scrambled out of the SUV, his legs shaky beneath him. He barely had time to register the wrecked sedan and the two unconscious men lying on the ground before the Resistance man grabbed his arm and started running. They sprinted down the narrow alleyway, their footsteps echoing off the brick walls. Liam's lungs burned as he struggled to keep up, his mind racing with 1,000 questions. But there was no time for answers. Now they had to keep moving, or they wouldn't make it out. As they turned the corner, Liam risked a glance back. The two men from the Foundation were stirring, slowly getting to their feet. They wouldn't stay down for long. The stakes had never been higher. As Liam and the Resistance man ran through the dark alleyways, the weight of the situation pressed harder on his chest. The faint sound of footsteps echoed behind them, getting closer. He could feel the hot breath of danger on his neck, knowing that the Foundation's men weren't far behind. Every shadow seemed to harbor another threat, and every turn of a corner felt like it might lead to a trap. The Resistance man, who had introduced himself only as Mark, was clearly injured. He winced with every step, blood trickling down his face from the wound on his forehead, but he didn't slow down. Liam marveled at his resilience, even as fear gnawed at the edges of his own sanity. The world he had known, school, friends, and a future full of possibility, had been ripped away, replaced by a life on the run, chased by forces he couldn't fully comprehend. "Where are we going?" Liam gasped, trying to keep pace. His lungs burned with exertion, and the adrenaline that had fueled his escape was starting to fade. "Somewhere they won't expect," Mark replied, his voice tight with pain. "But we have to keep moving. They won't stop. They never do." Liam didn't doubt that. The men from the Foundation were relentless, like shadows always lurking, ready to strike. But what he couldn't figure out was why they wanted him so badly. Yes, he had seen things he wasn't supposed to, defended a stranger on a bus, and now Mr. Davidson was in danger, but there had to be more to it. There had to be something about him specifically that made him so valuable to them. They rounded a corner, and Mark skidded to a halt in front of a rusted metal door. Without hesitation, he yanked it open, revealing a dark stairwell that led downward into the bowels of the city. He motioned for Liam to follow, and without thinking, Liam plunged into the darkness behind him. The stairs were steep and narrow, and the air was thick with the smell of damp concrete. They descended quickly, the sound of their footsteps swallowed by the oppressive silence around them. Liam's mind raced as he tried to piece together the puzzle of his life. The Mercedes showing up at his school, the strange messages, Mr. Davidson's abduction, none of it made sense, and yet it all felt connected. Mark reached the bottom of the stairwell and led Liam down a long, dimly lit corridor. The walls were covered in grime, and the flickering overhead lights cast eerie shadows on the floor. Liam couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap, but he trusted Mark, at least for now. He didn't have much of a choice. They finally stopped in front of a reinforced door. Mark pulled out a keycard from his pocket and swiped it through a reader. The door clicked open, and they stepped inside. Liam blinked in surprise as the dim corridor gave way to a high-tech control room. Monitors lined the walls, each displaying different angles of the city, traffic feeds, and news reports. People in tactical gear moved around with purpose, typing away on keyboards and communicating in low voices. It was clear that this was the headquarters of the Resistance. Mark slumped into a chair, wincing as he pressed a cloth to his bleeding head. A woman in a black jacket rushed over and knelt beside him, tending to his wounds. Liam stood awkwardly by the door, unsure of what to do next. "You're safe here, for now," Mark said, looking up at him with tired eyes. "But we don't have much time. They'll figure out where we are soon enough." Liam swallowed hard. What do they want from me? Why are they after me? Mark exchanged a glance with the woman before answering. "It's not just you, Liam. It's what you represent. The Foundation has been searching for people like you for years, people who are immune to their control." "Immune?" Liam asked, confusion washing over him. Mark nodded. "The Foundation operates by manipulating the thoughts, actions, and even memories of people. Most don't even know they're being controlled. But you're different. They can't control you, and that makes you a threat." Liam's head spun as he tried to process the information. Immune to control? How was that even possible? He wasn't special. He was just a normal high school student, wasn't he? But then again, nothing about his life had been normal since that day on the bus. It all felt surreal, like he was living in someone else's nightmare. "So what do they want to do with me?" Liam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mark's face darkened. "They want to turn you. If they can't control you, they'll break you, force you into submission. And if they can't do that, they'll eliminate you." Liam's heart pounded in his chest. The weight of Mark's words hung heavy in the air. He had known he was in danger, but he hadn't realized just how far the Foundation was willing to go to get what they wanted. It was terrifying. Before Liam could respond, the door to the control room burst open, and a tall, imposing man in tactical gear strode in. His presence commanded the room, and everyone fell silent as he approached Mark. "We have a problem," the man said in a low voice. "They've tracked us here. We don't have much time." Mark cursed under his breath. "How did they find us so fast?" The man shook his head. "I don't know, but we need to move. Now." Panic surged through Liam. They had just arrived, and now they had to run again. How long could they keep this up? And where would they go next? Mark stood up, wincing as he clutched his side. "All right, get everyone ready. We need to evacuate." The room erupted into chaos as people scrambled to pack up equipment and gather their things. Liam stood frozen in the middle of it all, feeling completely out of place. This wasn't his world, he wasn't a part of this fight. And yet somehow, he was at the center of it. The man in tactical gear approached Liam, his expression unreadable. "You need to come with us," he said, his voice gruff. "We can't afford to lose you."